All right, hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Star Wars Mark of Balance. My name is Mark, and the Andor train keeps on rolling. I am going to be giving you my thoughts on the fifth episode of the show named The Axe Forgets. And you guys know I'm a theme guy. A huge reason, and probably the biggest reason I love Star Wars, is because of how thematically heavy it is. And the main reason I have this podcast is to talk about those themes at length because I am so fascinated by them and I do love talking about them. So you guys already know I love this episode of Andor because the theme, the axe forgets and the tree remembers, is ingrained throughout every piece of this episode. And that's right from the title itself. It reveals everything right away. And titles can be many things. They can be a character's name, they can be imagery, they can be shocking to kind of tease something that's about to happen. But in this case, it's a thesis for the episode. Skeen is the MVP of this episode, and he's the one to introduce this concept of an axe forgets, but the tree remembers, symbolizing all the people who have been done wrong by the Empire. And as I'll talk about a little later, it doesn't have to only apply to the rebel or protagonist characters of this series. And we get these very intimate moments with all of them, and we learn what the axe, quote unquote, did to them to get to this point in their lives. And it's all really summed up in one of the best lines of the show so far, that everyone has their own rebellion. It's a fantastic Star Wars line. It's so Star Wars, but it's so relatable to the real world as well, and that's why it works so well. For the Imperial officer who is helping the rebels, it's to get payback for his lover being taken away and him being demoted by the Empire. For Nemec, it's literally to rebel against society itself and leave the galaxy in a better place, at least in his mind. And for Skeen, it's to avenge his brother's death, which we'll hear about at the end of the episode. And as I mentioned, I really appreciate that this concept is not mutually exclusive to just the protagonists of the show. We see Karn is becoming hyper-obsessed with finding and catching Andor, the person who basically ruined his life and why he's living at home with his mother now. Andor has likely forgotten about him, but he will never forget Andor. Deidre, our ISB agent, is shown to be ignored while walking past the other officer who she kind of butt heads with a couple episodes ago. So we can see that he's kind of moved on. He's already stepped up above her. He has all these planets to look over, and he doesn't really pay her any mind. But to her, she is motivated because of him, because of that humiliation that he brought upon her. And so now she's always going to remember him, and she's going to be using him to eventually ascend through the Empire herself. So he was the axe, but she's the tree that's going to grow and move up. It might even be a stretch, but I think even Mon Mothma fits into the theme of this episode. Of course, on the surface, she is rebelling against the Empire, but deep down, we are seeing the seeds of her rebelling against a normal life. I mean, the distance between her and her family is growing larger and larger every episode with these super tense and awkward conversations we have with her husband and her daughter. And I believe she's going to become a very tragic and lonely character. It's going to really recontextualize her. She's basically going to have nothing but the rebellion by the end of the show. And the rebellion will be her identity. I just love how the theme is ingrained into every fiber of this episode. For me, when the theme is front and center, that's when you get the best form of media. I think it's very fitting that by the end of the episode, we learn that Skeen's brother was a farmer of trees. Very full circle moment, and it's just full circle writing at its finest. And I cannot stress enough how all of these small, quiet moments are going to pay dividends when this mission finally starts and things start to go down. I know I'm personally going to be at the edge of my seat hoping that everyone gets out all right, even though I know it won't happen. Other aspects of this episode that I really enjoyed, again, surrounded the concept of realism that the show continues to establish. First, I have to talk about that fantastic TIE fighter scene. Making one TIE fighter that intimidating is important to show that the Empire is the power in the galaxy. I feel like TIEs in previous shows have become like fodder, when in reality they should instill fear everywhere they are. And hearing that scream of their engine should be a death sentence. I love how they captured that with such a simple scene in the show. And in general, the use of perspective with the Imperial ships has been really impressive. I'm really talking about that scene where they talk about the Imperial shuttle coming in to the atmosphere, and you just see it slowly moving in the background. It's not focused on, it's blurred, but it kind of gives you this lurking, tension-building feeling that the Empire is always there in the background. No matter what they're squabbling about there, the real enemy is the Empire. And they've done it with the TIE fighters as well, but I like that they've now shifted it to, any Imperial ship in the background now. It's just this lurking, extremely menacing presence that's looming over everyone. So I've really enjoyed this use of perspective throughout the show. I think an underappreciated part of the Rebel group that hasn't really been talked about so far is showing them making their own models for the mission and using their surroundings to kind of imagine how the operation will go down. We're so used to seeing people just pulling out holograms of a facility schematics that they somehow got, but here we see how underfunded the Rebels are, how committed they are to this, the research and the time it's taken to plan this out. All done but just by showing it, not telling the audience like, oh, we've been out here for so long, but we have these holograms. Look how the nice technology we have. I mean, they're using that manual navigator, which I'll talk about a little later when I analyze that Nemec scene, which was so fantastic. But just seeing them using very manual, analog kind of technology and building the models, and outside they're kind of just imagining like, oh, that's where the watchtower will be, that's where the tram station will be, that's where the troopers will be. It's just very cool, and it, again, grounds it in realism. I do want to jump back to the officer character because I like how they subtly show his character and backstory throughout this episode. Towards the end of the episode, we hear about what happened with him falling in love with the local and then basically her being taken away and him being stripped of his rank. But earlier in the episode, we hear this conversation he has with this controller on top of the structure. The controller basically mentions how smelly the locals are and how unbearable it would be if they were all being held in the base. First of all, just showing that like racist speciesist, because I don't really know if this the locals of this planet are human or not, but regardless, it kind of shows that, more realism, racism, speciesism in the Star Wars galaxy. But the officer's performance is really great here because we see him restrain his feelings. In the moment, we don't really get why he does that, but then later on when we hear that he had deep feelings for these locals, you could see why that comment would cut so deep for him. And it just shows his strength and resolve that he holds it back and just says, get back to work, basically. It's just a great tease. I love the setup. And I think the last scene I want to focus on before jumping into a new segment I would like to call Andor one-liners of the week, because there are so many damn good ones every week, is the scene with Nemec. Not only is Nemec's performance fantastic, but I love how the writing naturally unfolds in the scene. We start the scene by looking at this simple manual navigator device. Pretty run-of-the-mill scene, oh, we're going to be using this technology to get in and pull off this mission. But really what the device does is it allows the dialogue to steer towards the real point of the scene, which is the Imperial propaganda, the indoctrination, the thought machine, and really learning about Nemec's character. This idea that if we rely on Imperial devices, we will slowly, without realizing it, become part of the Imperial way of thinking. And this kind of spills over into Nemec's whole manifesto conversation about oppression and how the Empire hides behind atrocities. I just found the scene to be a very clever way to not only reveal characters' personalities, but also to make the scene more interesting. The scene could have been very simple, and it could have just been them sitting around a fire talking, and Nemec could have just started rambling about his big manifesto, but it wouldn't have been as impactful or organic. And I really just found it very masterful how they used objects to frame the objective of the scene and kind of push through the scene. So I just wanted to highlight that. All right, so now we'll jump into the new segment, which is the one-liners of the week. I am completely kidding. I'm not like a segments guy. I'm not going to start doing segments, but it just makes sense for the show because there's always a gem or multiple gems in these episodes, and I just would love to highlight them because these are great. The one line where Andor basically tells Skeen, oh, I'm just going to win and walk away. And Skeen kind of looks at him and says, win and walk away. Wouldn't that be lovely? Really just shows how long Skeen's been in this fight and how naive Cassian is, that he thinks it's just going to be one mission and he's done. He's like, you're in this for the long haul, but you don't see it yet. Of course, there's a line that everyone's been talking about. The pace of oppression outstrips our ability to understand it. I'll let that speak for itself. The surprise from above is never as shocking as the one from below. Kind of this idea of the upper classes, the powerful, the ruling class looking down on the people and never thinking that their power can be taken away. And that's why it's surprising. And they'll never expect it. And I just think it perfectly encapsulates the rebellion and how it works in the end. Deidre's line with her and her little assistant when they're talking through all these different attacks and all these different occurrences that they're starting to put it together, and they're basically like, it's too random to be random. One of those lines that should sound stupid, but it's actually perfect, and that scene is very interesting. I didn't talk about it, but it was very interesting that Deja takes this pill. I'm not sure if it was a caffeine pill or something like a stimulant to keep her up because it was a late night and they were going to do more work. But I think they deliberately showed it for a longer shot, and it was like 5 seconds. So that might come back around. Maybe something happened in her past that gave her this condition. Maybe she only has a couple years to live. I don't know. But I definitely don't think it wasn't intentional to show that she was taking like this pill while she was doing her work. So I think that'll come back around. I already mentioned everyone has their own rebellion. Fantastic. The scene where Andor is confronted by the whole group, basically saying like, oh, you're doing this for money. I just love that they're so dedicated that they look down on people that are doing things for money. Like they have no empathy for him. They don't even want the help anymore. Like they're just so disgusted with him. But what I really liked in that scene was when Andor is saying, the day before is too much time to worry. I know you were afraid, and don't use me as an excuse to not go through with this. Because it's so true. Like if he told them many days before, they'd be sitting with it. They'd be like, oh my gosh, he's only doing it for money. This guy has to have my back on this mission. What if he bails on us? He's just doing it for money. He's not really in this fight. And I just like how Andor is not wrong here. He's basically like, this was the best move for me, was to tell you right before. So you just heard it, you ate it, and we move forward. So shout out to Andor for having one of the one-liners this week. My Queen Mon Mothma actually came through with a great line, a little slap at her deadbeat husband, who basically says, oh, why didn't you tell me about the charity? You didn't think I'd be interested? And she's like, I know you wouldn't be interested because it's charitable. Love it. Go ahead, Queen. I love it. And I think the last line I want to highlight is, of course, from our MVP Skeen again. He says, I always hated the Empire. Now I don't know what to call how I feel. Just showing how deeply rooted and how it's so much more than just a surface level hatred. It's so much deeper than that. And I think this line just kind of encapsulates that very well. So I wanted to highlight that as well. So that concludes all my thoughts on Andor Episode 5, The Axe Forgets. As I mentioned, the theme is ingrained into every fiber of this episode, from the title to the character interactions. And personally, when the theme is the focal point of any piece of media, I think that is when it's at its height. So if Andor can deliver episodes like this again, where it just revolves around a central theme, I am so for it, and it's going to continue to be one of my favorite pieces of live-action Star Wars, and who knows, by the end of this, it might be one of my favorite pieces of Star Wars, period. So still loving Andor. The slow burn is going to pay off so well. You know what? It's not even a slow burn anymore. This is fantastic TV, not a slow burn. We don't need the action yet, but we will be getting action very soon. And I am predicting that the big explosive heist episode is going to coincide with the explosive dinner party episode with Mon Mothma as this other mission is going on. And I think if they are both done well, and I think they will be, that singular episode will be one of the most gripping and intense and fantastic pieces of Star Wars we will ever get. I think they've set it up so well. And we know these trains are about to collide. We know where these guys are headed, and I cannot wait for this heist to start, and I cannot wait for Mon Mothma to be surrounded by her enemies in her own home. It's going to be fantastic. But as always, thank you guys so much for listening. Really appreciate it. Follow me on Instagram at @star_wars_mark of balance. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy, and may the Force be with you. Peace.